Hello, this is hardcore legend Mick Foley, and you are listening to POTSY and the Turd. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Potsy and the Turd, starring Charles Ward the Turd and Rob Potsy Pochak. Our theme song, as always, is brought to you by Adam's Housecat. It's called The Wrestling Song and is available on iTunes for 99 cents. Ward, wake up from your pizza coma, because we have plenty to be thankful for in this post-Thanksgiving edition of Potsy and the Turd, and we are talking about our favorite topic that we don't talk about all that often anymore, and that is pro wrestling.
Yes. It is pro wrestling.
So what is on the discussion table tonight, sir?
Oh my God, Rob, what a week, man. You want to talk about, I can't remember the last time that there was this much crazy stuff come out all in one, 3 or 4 day span, I guess. You know, we had the interview with Colt Cabana interviewing CM Punk that dropped actually on Thanksgiving Day, I believe. And then last night, immediately following Monday Night Raw, we had Steve Austin's interview with Vince McMahon. Where to begin, Rob? I mean, we could, I have digested probably 6 to 8 hours worth of wrestling audio in the past, 4 days. So there's a lot to talk about. I don't even know where to start.
So we're gonna go. I'm gonna state on the record right now that we may drop some explicit language tonight. Because we may be quoting some things, we might actually have our own.
There's a lot of explicit language to be quoted.
That we're definitely going to be dropping some F-bombs. So we're warning everybody in advance. I also want to thank our friends at Heelbook who posted an article called "The 16 Most Important Points from the Punk Breaking His Silence Interview," and our friends at Lords of Pain have also given us a full recap on the Vince McMahon talk with Stone Cold Steve Austin. So Ward, where do you want? I feel almost like CM Punk here, where it's like, where do we begin?
Well, I guess let's talk a bit. I guess about the Punk interview and about, I guess, the major things that he touched on. I think we should probably start with, like, what do you think was the biggest story or the biggest thing to come out of his interview? The single biggest.
You mean besides his unhappiness? I mean, that's what it's always been about.
Well, I mean, what do you think is the most revealing thing? Exactly
how injured and sick he was. I think that above all else is the very first thing that I think a lot of people took for granted, because he was a trooper. He was a guy that was willing to go the extra mile, using that Harley Race mentality or that Mick Foley mentality of the show must go on, and he was the trooper. He was the guy that wanted to prove that the day in, day out guys deserved to be in the last match at WrestleMania. One of the things that he brought up multiple times is that he wanted to be the guy that actually did main event WrestleMania. And yes, he brought up money plenty of times, but his wanting to be in the main event had less to do with the money and more to do with the let me go on last.
It was the respect of it. He wanted the respect of being the top guy at WrestleMania, and also being paid like the top guy. Because money equals respect.
Absolutely. Well, and obviously, out of the 6 guys that he mentions, Brock Lesnar, John Cena, Triple H, The Rock, and The Undertaker, and himself, who do we actually think got paid the least out of those 6 guys for the last WrestleMania? And I guess last year's WrestleMania. And truth be told, if I had to put money where my mouth was, I would say that CM Punk was the guy that got paid less than everybody else there. I just think that when you think about it, while he was becoming one of the biggest names in the business, I don't think that his name actually carried as much weight as those guys throughout history. And I think that's obviously true, but I do think he was also the hottest guy at the time, and had just gotten out of his little mini feud with The Rock that lasted 2 months, and obviously that was another part of the whole thing was that Vince convinced him to go heel when he was selling more merchandise than John Cena at the time. So that's the big thing I got out of it. What did you take out of it? Like, what was the biggest shock to you?
Well, I mean, kind of, kind of just a different version of the same thing that you said. I think that the most surprising thing is the absolute hollowness and corruption of their medical treatment that's there for their people. Yeah, I mean, he had a massive staph infection on his back that went untreated for months, according to him, because of just a doctor's laziness. But it goes to show you the truth and the inside of the matter, that they don't employ doctors for the good of their employees. They employ doctors to keep the show going. The NFL team doctor, of any team, his job isn't necessarily, to get you well. His job is to get you on the field playing. And that seems to be the same in WWE. It's quite astounding, really, what he actually went through. And the fact that if he had received decent treatment, he might even still be there, maybe.
Well,
he was so sick and so out of it. Who could function at that
now
level?
we're going to touch upon we're obviously going to talk about the Vince McMahon interview as well. And folks, you might want to grab some popcorn and a drink, because this might be a long episode of POTSY and the Turd. I just want to give everybody a warning shout out there. We're going to touch upon it, but one of the things that Vince McMahon absolutely said was, actually Stone Cold actually said that he was one of those guys that night in and night out had to be there. He had to. But then you see the champion like Brock Lesnar, and Brock Lesnar's not there every night. Could you imagine had Stone Cold Steve Austin only had to show up 35 times a year? Exactly, A, how big of an attraction he'd probably be when he does show up. B, how much longer his career actually would have been. And C, where would we be now with that? Would he have ever gotten upset? Would he have ever left? Because he wouldn't have had to do the job to one Brock Lesnar on his first night in the business, So there's a lot of
sure.
There's a lot of stuff there.
That really plays into this idea that a lot of the bigwig wrestling journalists, Wade Keller and Dave Meltzer and those guys have been talking about for years, which is some sort of system of systematic time off on a rotating basis of multiple weeks at a time. Either once or twice or 3 times a year. For these wrestlers, so that they can actually heal and actually continue to do the job without getting run down and relying on pain pills, which is something that's very important to remember, is that, CM Punk wasn't willing to turn to those kind of methods to keep wrestling. Or I guess, Phil Brooks, we should say, because we're not really talking about CM Punk anymore. CM Punk is a character. We're talking about Phil Brooks. He didn't cut a promo. This is Phil Brooks, the real guy telling his actual story.
Not caring how many F-bombs he dropped in the process.
Oh man, he started off slow, but when he got going, man, he was an F-bomb machine. But a lot of wrestlers are. That's just the way they talk. That's the language of the business.
I told you while we were live watching the Vince McMahon interview that CM Punk sounded like he was going for the Kevin Nash record of most F-bombs dropped in a podcast. So he may have actually easily beaten it, considering he had 2 hours to talk. Kevin Nash probably only had about an hour and 15 minutes. So let's go through some of these things that Punk actually discussed. He basically said right at the beginning of the podcast that most of what people heard was true. Right? Most of the things that they heard about what was going on with him at the time were true. So he was injured, yes.
Right. He was upset about the money. He was injured. He was extremely exhausted. He was drained emotionally. He needed time off. He was frustrated with the booking. All that stuff was all basically a part of the problem.
Yeah, and he pretty much said he hated the business at the time he finally left. So that's pretty interesting. That he was that honest about it. He was not a quieter either. He was as people misspell it on Twitter. He was fired. Was served his walking papers, and even Vince McMahon admitted that on the Stone Cold podcast.
Well, yeah, but he walked out. In a legal sense, officially, yeah, he was fired on paper, but really. He walked out.
Sure. No, absolutely. Absolutely. He left.
Which there's no shame in doing. He left a situation that he was unhappy with, and if you have enough money to be secure and you don't want to do it anymore, you shouldn't. You should have that right. A lot of people last year really criticized him heavily for leaving money on the table. Jim Ross and Steve Austin, among others. But if he's ready to be done, why shouldn't he be done? So, I don't think there's any shame in him quitting, but really he walked out.
Now, see, I don't exactly know.
But he was served favors.
I don't exactly know how signing a contract is any different than saying that you're going to work for a company, but at any given point, you can quit your job.
Well, he signed a contract, meaning he couldn't do dates with other people. but he doesn't have to pick up any dates if he doesn't want to. He's still an independent contractor who can choose to pick up dates or not pick up dates.
Sure, and
he just can't work for anyone else.
He even said that for 7 or 8 years he was an independent contractor, but he wasn't allowed to do that. And independent contractors pretty much can pick up any job they want, in any other field.
Well, yeah, which is something that I'm sure we'll get into in terms of how he won his legal battle, because he alluded to it in the interview. He actually threatened to challenge the independent contractor status of wrestlers, which is something they can't have. So
yeah, I bet
that
was part of the settlement that they came up with for everything that he's not allowed to discuss. I bet that's part of what he's not actually allowed to go into.
Well, he has no gag order on him at all, except for the actual settlement and the terms of it. He made that clear in this interview, but I assumed that it had some sort of clause where he couldn't file any future litigation. Against them for any reason whatsoever. This is over, this is done, whatever. But he made it pretty clear that he didn't have any sort of gag order on him about anything except for the actual terms.
No, I agree. He said money isn't everything. He wasn't doing this podcast as a shoot interview where he could have made thousands of dollars or whatever, plus royalties.
Which I admire greatly.
Me too. But, he probably made Colt Cabana thousands of dollars by doing this podcast for him.
Well, maybe, but he's staying loyal to his friend.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Which is and I really admire the fact that it's something that anybody can listen to for free. That he didn't, because it would have been the biggest shoot tape ever, or the biggest get ever for any wrestling podcast. For sure.
Sure.
But the fact that he's sticking with his buddy is good.
Yeah, and this obviously got Colt Cabana some heat as well, considering the episode of the podcast was actually sponsored by WWE 2K15. So
which was hilarious.
Which was pretty hilarious. And he gave a good spot for him. He didn't try to saw it off at the knees or anything. But The Rock didn't do, or I'm sorry, CM Punk didn't do this because of the money, and he also didn't leave because of the money. Now I disagree with some of that. He said that money isn't everything, but there were times where he definitely brought up the fact that he deserved more money. And he said, in fact, the exact quote was, "You're right, I made millions, I should have made 10." And I don't disagree with him. I think if you look back at the history of the business, when someone is doing the merch sales and everything else that he was, that he should have been getting paid like John Cena. And obviously his merch checks probably were better than John Cena's at the time, at least until Vince McMahon said, no, John Cena's still our guy, let's go ahead and turn CM Punk heel. Creatively, financially, and personally, CM Punk was unhappy. He was not happy with anything going on. He wasn't getting to enjoy his reign as champion. He got LASIK surgery the night before the Nexus came out, and then that night he's supposed to be out getting beaten up by these new guys. And of course, what did they do, Ward? They went ahead and poked him in the eyes multiple times. When he's like, "Not my eyes, not my eyes," and of course in the wrestlers' terminology, that basically means the first place you got to go is for the eyes. But let's touch upon the financial thing, the big one, the elephant in the room. No one has still talked about how the financials work with the WWE Network for the wrestlers. CM Punk said that his royalty checks actually stopped. He didn't get the Royal Rumble royalty check. I'm sure he did by the time that all this litigation was actually over with. But like he was the first guy. He was the Jesse Ventura in this situation where he was like, "How do I get paid for you using my likeness and using my stuff here?" And Vince McMahon apparently would just...
Well, it was all about the network. It was, how is the pay structure going to be affected by the WWE Network, and no one could give him an answer.
And Vince McMahon actually just laughed it off, apparently.
Right. I mean, which is a big deal. I mean, what he's getting at there when he says, I made millions, I should have made 10, is that if you look at a cross section of professional sports, as a percentage, pro wrestlers are paid a much smaller percentage of the gross than, say, NFL or any other major league sports organization. The percentage of all the income is much smaller comparatively.
Well, the reason why is because
also
the reason why though is because there's no actual players association. There's no union. If wrestlers were to unionize,
right, exactly.
Vince McMahon would go with scabs.
Exactly, which kind of leads into my next point, which is that if you looked at any television shows that aired in their same time slot that drew a comparable amount of ratings, what would those actors be getting paid as a percentage of the gross income? And I guarantee you it would be higher than what wrestlers make, which is a problem. But the other problem is just a simple lack of respect for your employees, a simple lack of being able to call a meeting and say to people, hey, look, we don't know exactly what the deal is yet. We have to see what the subscriber count is. We have to see this and that. And then we'll figure out how the pay is going to work. They don't do any of that. They just, which is wrong, because the cost of setting up the network and launching it is supposed to be on the backs of management. They're the ones who came up with the idea and put it in place. The workaday performers are still putting forth the same effort that they were before the network launched. Their pay should not be dependent upon the schemes of upper management working out correctly or working out to their lofty expectations.
Well, hell, I mean,
that's a problem.
You say that they're working just as much. No, they're working harder, because they've got the Total Divas show that's on the network that's following people around, and we're talking some of the top wrestlers. John Cena's being followed around by cameras. Daniel Bryan's
sure.
Being
Either way, they don't deserve to have their pay affected by the schemes of upper management. And CM Punk was one of the only people who was willing to stand up for that.
Yeah,
because people don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that he made mention that Randy Orton was one of the guys that came up to him and said, "Hey, do you know how we're going to get paid for this?" And like CM Punk was going to be one of those guys that actually knew that stuff. I'm kind of glad I'm not in this kind of field where something like this could seriously affect the amount of income I'm actually earning. I mean, especially when you're talking, the top guys also have the buses that they've got to pay for and everything else, so that they remain.
Well, if they want to.
Well,
they don't have to. But if they want to, then they do.
You hear guys like Stone Cold Steve Austin constantly say that if he was around and decided that he wanted to get a tour bus, that it would have ended up being part of his contract. He wasn't necessarily going to pay for it himself. I mean, heck, CM Punk actually talked about how he was taking the corporate jet, which you can pretty much believe that when he signed that contract extension in 2011, that certain dates with the corporate jet were probably something that he got approved so that he could go back to Chicago, so that he could go to have these certain things done, and it's just pretty interesting to hear about. Anything else you want to add about the financial side of anything, Ward? Because there's a bunch of stuff we got to get through here.
Well, I mean, his other big issue with money was when he was complaining that he wasn't getting paid as well as the top 6 guys that you already mentioned, which I think is. There's 2 ways you could take it. One is he's whining that he's not getting getting paid as much as a bona fide pay-per-view UFC legend Brock Lesnar, or a bona fide Hollywood movie star draw like The Rock. But his issue is that the money equals the level of respect that Vince and that Hunter have for him, and the fact that he is working there every single day, while literally almost every single one of those other names of those 6 guys is not going to be there the next day, makes him feel like he deserved more money, because he didn't feel like he was getting the respect he was owed for being one of the guys who was there all the time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. In fact,
which is a reasonable argument, I guess. But it wasn't necessarily that he wanted all the money. He wanted the respect that the money conveyed.
Well, absolutely, the top guy should be paid the top amount, and that's kind of what he was going for. I found it interesting if you actually look at his final year with the WWE before he left, and you look at his track record with the pay-per-view matches he ended up having. He had The Rock in January, The Rock in February. He had The Undertaker in April, and then after that, he had Chris Jericho in May when he came back early from his time off, and then he had Brock Lesnar in August. And you look at it and you think this guy's wrestling with all the part-timers. Now, I found it really interesting that he was wrestling all the part-timers, because he's complaining about all the part-timers getting top pay and top booking on these things, but yet when you heard him actually say that he's talking about The Rock, he was like, well, I want to work The Rock. I want to work with him. I think it'd be a challenge. And he's right. It was a challenge. In fact, The Rock actually made it through the 2 matches with CM Punk without injury, and that in both matches with John Cena, he got injured. So obviously someone had better care for what was going on in those matches. Or, it's just the Rock and John Cena worked stiffer against each other than CM Punk did. I don't know. But But, you look back and just about every major match that he had that year was against part-time people. And he was working every month. He was working in and out, getting the job done. And this is all in the process of having bad knees, the MRSA infection, all this stuff started and was going on at this point. So the guy was a trooper going through it day in, day out, and he was getting the paycheck every month where none of these other guys were. I don't know. I looked at it and yes, a little bit of it does sound like he's complaining when you talk about the financials of WrestleMania that year. I think the biggest part of that though was that he basically said if I'm gonna be the main event and everyone says that my match should have went on last, well fuck it, I should be on last. And he's like, and you should pay me like I was on last if you actually think my match should have went on last.
Right, exactly. He was insulted by the fact that everyone thought so much of his match with Undertaker, to tell him that was the main event of the show, and he said, "Why wasn't I on last?" Which I think makes some sense. But there's an answer for it too. There's a lot of problems with his interview where, from the other perspective, I could see a perfectly reasonable answer to some of his questions. But yeah,
I think we end up there in that situation because it's one side of the story. If he really had a problem with the part-time associates coming in and working the matches, do you really think that he would have said, "Yeah, okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrestle these guys"? No, he got the biggest paycheck when he wrestled against The Rock. His paycheck was probably bigger than John Cena's for the Royal Rumble that year, but we didn't hear about that. We just know that he had to put The Rock over, and then he got a second match against The Rock. Now The Rock was making more money than just about anybody else that came in at that point, and it's simple to see why.
And he should have been.
Absolutely.
And he should have been.
So there's a bunch of stuff there. I just he talks about how he should have been paid the best, and if you sign the contract that says that this is what you're going to get paid and this is how your royalties are going to be based on pay-per-view revenue, that's one thing. But we've all heard the stories about how when Jim Ross was running talent relations for the WWE, that he was the one that got to cut the pay-per-view checks. Vince would basically say, "Okay, well here's what you're getting, and go ahead and break it down based on the performances." And there's obviously that one big story about Edge, Christian, the Hardys, and the Dudleys all basically tearing down the house with the tables, ladders, and chairs match, and they got pissed off at their payouts. They said we got the biggest pop of the night, we had the best match of the night, and you paid us like we were curtain jerkers. And what did Jim Ross end up doing? Do you know that story, Ward?
No, I haven't heard that story.
Bully Ray or Bubba Ray at the time went right up to him and he said, "We deserve more money." And Jim Ross ended up cutting him checks. And I'm sure he had to make a phone call to Vince, and Vince was like, "Well, go ahead and give them the money." Because otherwise he had 6 of their top performers getting ready to walk out the door. So yeah, they got new checks cut and they went about their business. But that's because they did a tables, ladders, and chairs match. The fact that Punk had to do a tables, ladders, and chairs match against Ryback when it was 3 weeks after his knee surgery. That's ridiculous.
I believe it was either knee or elbow surgery or something. I mean, he and that's the other thing too is that leads into the medical corruption is how little regard Vince McMahon has for the recovery time. It wasn't that long ago that John Cena was supposed to have 6 months to recover from something and was back in 2.
Oh yeah, that elbow surgery. But see, you see
there. This is a pattern with him.
But you see there that it's not just CM Punk that was getting this, because he made it sound like it's only him that's going through this, and that brings up.
Well, he had certain things he was mad about that were only him, but as far as the corruption of the medical treatment, that's definitely the whole roster. That's everybody.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the worthless concussion test. He basically says that at the Royal Rumble he got a concussion. They gave him the concussion test and he passed it. Well, concussions are I've listened to many interviews with Chris Nowitzki, or read many interviews with Chris Nowitzki, the guy who has started the Concussion Research Institute, but it's Sports Institute something. So So anyway, anytime you hear Chris Nowitzki talk about it, he says that it's not a perfect science. It's not something where you can always know exactly what's going on with people, and different people handle concussions differently. There have been college football players that get concussions and basically get put back in the game because they passed the concussion test. Now granted, I think sometimes the kid gets put back in there because they're just like, hey, you're our best chance to win, even if you're seeing 4 things on at a time. And I think that's completely wrong, and I think that it's BS. But what I found really interesting about it is that, Dolph Ziggler ended up getting a concussion immediately after winning the WWE World Heavyweight Championship, right after WrestleMania a couple years ago. And then what happened? They kept him off the road for a month, and it wasn't because they don't like Dolph Ziggler. They wouldn't have given him the championship if they didn't like Dolph Ziggler. They gave him the championship. He got kicked in the head, and he wasn't able to go. So I don't know if his concussion was different than anyone else's. But when Nowitzki talks about it, and someone goes, "How many concussions have you ever had?" Nowitzki goes, "Do you realize that every time that you just see stars, you have a concussion?" Now granted, I don't know if that's
it's a traumatic brain event.
Yeah, it's a swelling of the brain.
It means that your brain has hit the wall of your skull, and that's bad. And there's varying degrees of severity.
Yes, so him passing that test and then them saying, "We want you to go run the ropes just to see if you can do it," and he's like, "I can't. I've got a concussion." And then he dropped another expletive there, and to me, I just have this feeling that I think he was probably more adamant about getting back in the ring than he's letting on now. But I think that's because of his stubbornness, and this is no disrespect to him. I think that most of the best guys have been stubborn because they realize that to keep your spot, you have to continue to go out there. And because of that, I'm not saying that I disagree that he went back out there and kept doing this stuff. But that was pretty much the night when he said, "I'm done. I have a concussion. Your doctors know I have a concussion." Hell, he even said that when he was in the Royal Rumble after he got kicked by Kofi Kingston, he said, "Doc, I have a concussion." And the doctor looked at him like, "Well, what the hell do you want me to do about it?"
Well, I mean, it was a funny moment. He said that even he laughed out loud because he's sitting there, in the middle of this match, and of course they devised a way, for Kane to, eliminate him and throw him through the table or whatever. Which is a great way to treat somebody who's just had a concussion, is to choke slam them through a table. But the doctor's just like, "Well, what do you want me to do?" We're in the middle of a match, which goes to show you, they're not worried about it. They're not going to stop the show, for stuff like that. They didn't stop the show for Owen Hart. They're not going to stop the show for a CM Punk concussion. Are you kidding? Well, Triple H finished out a match with his quadricep hanging off of his bone.
Yeah, but a lot of these guys nowadays, they do stop matches for bleeding or for major injury or anything. It's just you're talking about a 30-man over the top battle royal. You can't stop that match. Now could the doctors have said climb out and you're sure. Knowing Punk, he probably would have climbed out through the ropes instead of over the top ropes, so that all of a sudden he still has a chance to claim that he won the Royal Rumble, and that might be something they didn't want, so they left him in there, and then as you said, chain chokeslammed him through a table. Okay, so injuries. Another one is the MRSA staph infection. So why don't you touch upon that, Ward?
Oh, well, he had this long, drawn out kind of dramatic story that he told about this kind of fatty, calcium deposit type thing on his back that was right along where his wrestling trunks would sit on his body. And he went to the WWE doctor several times and said, cut this thing open or drain it or cut it out or do whatever you got to do with it. Just get it off me. And several times he was told, "No, we don't want to do that right now, because we might have to give you a stitch or whatever." And they gave him, Z-Packs. They gave him general, antibiotics for his thing, whatever it was. I guess they didn't think what it could be. Maybe they just thought it was a regular staph infection and not a MRSA staph infection, which are apparently two different things. But either way, he goes back several times, and they keep telling him, we don't want to cut it open. We don't want to mess with it, until eventually, after he walks out, he goes to another doctor, I believe in Florida, and the doctor tells him it's a full-blown staph infection and it needs to be, it needs to have surgery like immediately or be drained immediately, which is pretty terrifying. The doctor tells him that it could have killed him. According to Phil Brooks, says that the doctor looked right at him and said, "You should be dead," which is really bad. It makes them look incredibly bad. It makes their medical testing and their medical department just look like kind of a joke.
Well, okay, so I've got a let's go ahead and add a little more information into that, and then I've got an opinion here that I think is probably a little bit different than the norm. The other information is that they continue to give him standard antibiotics, which for a MRSA infection, by the time it is a full-blown MRSA infection, will not do anything for it. That's what he basically said. That's what the doctor he went to told him. So obviously CM Punk is not a professional doctor, so he does not know what exactly is said here. I've read some articles recently right after the interview that did say that initially Zithromax is supposed to actually handle that and is supposed to take care of the staph infection, but by the time it becomes a full-blown MRSA infection, it cannot, because it is too strong and needs something even more powerful, like an IV drip, which is what he ended up getting. At the same time, you and I both talked about it, Ward, that if you take antibiotics multiple times over the course of a certain amount of time, your body builds up an immunity to it, or at least a tolerance to it, right? Just like it would alcohol or anything else. So
right. Well, the bacteria, the germs, whatever, develop. Yeah,
but that's all based on that's all based on the stuff inside
your
own blood doing that. So obviously he developed a tolerance or even an intolerance, which may have caused more damage to the staph infection at the time. Now, the reason why I said that my opinion may change here, may be a little bit different than other people, is because like we've all had certain medical issues where things are said like that. I was once told that while getting getting a needle put in my back, that they basically said if they put it in the wrong spot, I could be paralyzed for the rest of my life. Doctors will sit there and tell you that you should be dead based on this. But when you're in the physical condition that someone like CM Punk is, you're obviously going to be stronger and better to be able to pull through stuff like this. Jake the Snake Roberts, same thing. Guy's battled cancer twice now. First time, people were actually shocked that he made it through. Second time, they were basically like, well, because you've been doing DDP yoga, you can get through that kind of thing. And it basically just goes to show what kind of physical specimen he actually was, and obviously he lived a much healthier life. I find it interesting that, when he's talking about the staph infection, he's talking about the concussions, he said that the next thing that they wanted him to do was piss in a cup. Now, the reason why I have a problem with this statement that he made is because if he's straight edge, why would he have any problem pissing in a cup? Like, regardless of Triple H doing it or anybody else, this is a guy who's supposed to be completely clean. He's supposed to not have anything in his system except for maybe antibiotics when the doctor prescribes them. So how or why?
I don't think it was the actual drug test that pissed him off. It was the fact that
Triple H wasn't doing it.
It was all these little things. Well, no, it was all these little things in the course of a day that were adding up to make him say, basically, fuck this. You know what I mean? It was, and then somebody was coming up to him with a thing to sign for his passport for the next. Yeah. Somebody's coming up with a passport thing for him to sign for the next European tour. There's the concussion test. They want him to run the ropes. There's the piss test. There's all this other shit going on, and he feels terrible. He feels awful. He's concussed. He's sick of his medical issues and his problems not being dealt with. While all they want to do is have him piss in a cup, but they don't want to take a look at the massive staph infection on his back. And so it's one of the things that makes him say fuck it. So that's one of the things that he takes to Triple H, and he also does call Triple H out for not taking the same test. Apparently, that's what he insinuates. But I don't think he had a problem with the actual test itself.
Okay, well, I don't disagree with you there. I just think that it's funny that he's bringing up this piss test and he's supposed to be living this clean life. Now, granted, at the same time, you're right. Triple H said that who cares if he takes the test, But he did mention that Dave Bautista had just taken the same test, and Dave Bautista does look a lot smaller than he did when he left. Now, they said he had just taken the test, so who knows if Dave Bautista actually passed it or not. No, I'm kidding. But
No, who knows?
Well, you're absolutely.
There's no oversight to their testing policy. That's what many other people have said, and what's confirmed by Punk is that he even alleged that Ryback, he called him the steroid guy. Bob Holly in Bob Holly's book talked about the hollowness of their drug testing policy and the fact that it's not done by an independent third party.
I thought it was now.
And the fact I don't believe it is. It has been done by independent third parties at times in the past when the steroid heat gets too much. They kind of turn it on and off, and they have in the past, but it's very expensive. So when the heat isn't on them, they don't do it. Then they have complete control over who gets suspended and who doesn't get suspended. They will give guys strikes on their record for failing tests if the guy really needs some time off. That was the case with Randy Orton a couple years ago where he wanted a month off, so they gave him a strike to give him an excuse to be off. And then they instituted a policy later on where you could work off your strikes, which is something else that CM Punk talks about.
That one right there. That one right there kind of pisses me off because you think about it, and they keep giving Randy Orton the ball to run with, and yet the guy's been injury prone, but yet Dolph Ziggler's injury prone, so we don't give him the ball. He's gotten 2 strikes for the wellness policy for smoking pot or whatever. And granted, what Randy Orton probably did was known that he was getting ready to take one of those tests and went ahead and did smoke right there so that he could get the month off. But but I digress.
So I mean,
that's
the thing.
there.
If you have a way to work off a strike, then why not? Why bother with it?
But then you have
but more than anything, the whole idea of working off strikes is just a way for them to be able to book the way they want to book.
But then you have,
because otherwise they can't be confident in putting anybody in good positions, because what if they fail a piss test again?
Yeah, no.
Then they're gone for 2 years or 3 years or whatever. So it's a convenience thing for them. When somebody fails a piss test, they can say, "Oh, well, that person, has worked off one of their strikes, so they can continue to be on TV and work." But whatever, But that's what he's talking about: is the corruption and the hollowness of all of their programs and how they're only done basically for PR reasons. Especially the concussion program and especially all of the medical staffing that they've done.
So, one of the things that I did find interesting about the story is that he said that he did say goodbye to Vince and Triple H to their face. And I was
Yep.
I was a little shocked by it because everything else we had read is that he was backstage, basically said, "I'm not doing this," and then just walked out. So hearing that he actually went backstage and actually said everything we've pretty much just talked about. I'm hurt, I'm sick, I don't love it, I've been shitting my pants from all these antibiotics you guys have been giving me. He even made a pretty funny joke about that, saying that he was almost afraid that his new gimmick was going to be having to come down to the ring wearing full white trunks and white outfit, and then basically shitting himself in the ring. Which, when you watch things like Beyond the Mat, you tend to believe that Vince McMahon probably would like that if a guy could just shit on command. So, considering Darren Drozdoff before his broken neck was known as Puke, because he could puke on command. So that was pretty disgusting in both ways. But pretty much saying that obviously with Triple H being the guy that was running talent relations at the time, that his conversation with Vince and Triple H, he said that everything that he basically said to him, Triple H was gritting his teeth, and he said, "I just knew from that this guy didn't like me." Well, what do you expect from a guy when you're saying a lot of stuff that he doesn't like hearing to his face 20 minutes before you go on the air? What do you expect from him? I mean, how would you take that, Ward? If a person that worked for you came up to you and said, "You're a piece of shit, you're not going to take a drug test, but I have to take a drug test. I have a concussion." And you want to put me out there, you want to squash me in a match, you want to do all this other stuff. If you had to deal with that, and you were the head of talent relations at the time, so you're the human resources or manager of a job, what's your take on it? Wouldn't you be a little bit pissed off? Wouldn't you need a moment to absorb it all before you could let it out?
I guess. I mean, I've never been in a situation even remotely like this. I've also never been in a situation where somebody's calling me out for all those things and they're all true. Or the vast majority of them are true. I just think Triple H finally kind of met his match. He met somebody who wasn't going to lay down and take it, and he met somebody who, frankly, was not very easy to work with and wasn't going to be taken advantage of. I think that's one of the main lessons from this whole interview is that Phil Brooks is not really a nice guy. He's not really anybody's buddy. He's not really easy to work with. He put up a stink about a lot of things. A lot of it was reminiscent, of the way that Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were always had to be coddled and talked to for long hours on the phone about all these random different things they wanted to talk about. So from the employer's perspective, I could say, hey, we did a whole lot for you. We gave you this huge long title reign. We gave you big money runs with almost every special attraction we had. So you got good paychecks, blah, blah, blah. And there's some to both of that, but they didn't buy his house. That's for sure. That's one of the famous statements that'll come out of this. It's almost like the Brett screwed Brett statement is, the we bought your house statement.
Well, hold on. That we bought your house statement wasn't about WWE. It was about the fans. Those were the people calling him a quieter. A quitter for all you that didn't actually listen to the interview. He was basically saying that you owe us, the fans were saying you owe us an explanation. We paid for your house. We paid for your money.
Oh, okay.
And truthfully, like the merch deals, the pay-per-view buy rates, the everything else, it's one of those things where, if you work in retail, you sit there and say it's all about the customer. Well, it is, because the customer actually pays for the business to stay open. If you're at Walmart or anything like that, that's truly the case. But it doesn't entitle you to answers to everything. So the fact that I think we got all these answers from Phil Brooks was more than we deserved. And the reason why is because the reason why is because when you think about it, like, we sit here, and yes, I was a fan of CM Punk as a wrestler. I didn't necessarily like everything he said on Twitter or anything like that, and the reason why is because he's real. So I didn't have to like everything he said. But I'll tell you this right now, he's the first guy since Stone Cold Steve Austin that I felt like I had to go out and buy wrestling merchandise for. Now, I'm not going to buy any of his current stuff that he just put on his new store because I don't like the looks of any of it. But his Best in the World shirts that came out when WWE, when he came back after the pipe bomb interview, that he doesn't even like calling it a pipe bomb anymore because it's become everybody just sitting there giving a shoot is a pipe bomb now, and that's not really the case. But he basically had me sit there and go, I like this guy enough that I'm going to spend $25 on a WWE shirt when I go to a live event. And hell, the fact that he was going to be at the live event was one of the reasons why I went. Had it been a SmackDown live event, I probably would not have gone. But because it was a Raw live event, I went, I bought the shirt, I watched his match, and you know what, actually I think I bought that shirt at the pay-per-view. But either way, if I wasn't a fan of his, I wouldn't have bought any of that stuff. So I am a CM Punk fan for what he did in the ring, for the interviews that he gave, for the fact that like from what we heard from behind the scenes, he was trying to trailblaze the next revolution of how people got paid in the industry and how they got taken care of. How they medically got taken care of. I'm surprised he didn't have his own doctor in that contract and he still went to the WWE doctor at that point, because if you don't trust a doctor with your life, you shouldn't go see him. And he obviously has a lot of disdain. I almost think that on his totem pole of people that he hates, it's probably Triple H, then the doctors, then maybe Vince McMahon. I don't think it's the other way around. I don't think he hates Vince as much as he hates everyone else. He just wanted answers from Vince, and Vince couldn't always give them to him. And it's because he runs a
I agree.
He runs $1 billion industry. He's the figurehead on it. There's so many CEOs that have no idea what their businesses are actually doing, and all they've got to do is sit there and read the paperwork to Wall Street to sit there and keep their jobs. They get voted in. They don't actually work for the company. They're part of the board of directors. Now, granted, this is Vince's company. He owns more stock than anybody else. He'll continue to own more stock than anybody else. Obviously, Ward, we could talk more about the other odds and ends about everything. I did find it interesting that he talked about how everyone that works for the WWE does extensive Make-A-Wish work, but yet only John Cena was the one that actually got like noticed for it. Now, granted, you'll see pictures of Sheamus doing a Make-A-Wish or anything along those lines. So they do credit everybody with them, but they don't say, well, CM Punk did 400 of those in a year. I thought that was a little bit interesting. You and I talked off air about the fact that he was upset that when he did the big pipe bomb interview and left with the championship, that when he came back, he had sponsors actually wanting to just sponsor him. And, the timeliness of it was basically saying that he didn't get that because he was under contract already. And he could have gotten it had he probably just held out a little while longer.
Well, maybe. A lot of the stuff that he was mad about, especially the stuff that he was wanting to be unique for his character, was stuff that he was mad about because of basically, really badly timed coincidences that made it seem like he was being given the shaft, which, looking from his perspective, I can understand, and I can also understand from the other perspective. One of his big things, one of his big tenets of the interview that he was really upset about was that there's no long-term planning for anything. There was no plan for him after he lost to The Rock. There was no plan after he lost to Undertaker. There was no plan after he lost to anybody of what the next step was going to be with him. So if that's the case, which I believe it is, then I don't think they knew when they refused him sponsors that they'd be bringing in Brock Lesnar, and that Brock Lesnar would already have sponsors in place, and that he would have to honor those deals, and that they would have to acquiesce to the sponsors as a part of getting Brock Lesnar, who's a massive, proven pay-per-view draw yet again.
Yeah. If you want Brock,
so that turned out,
you have to let this happen.
You accept the deals that he already has in place, that he already signed. Yeah. Which is part of the deal, part of his gimmick as well. CM Punk wanted to be unique and have sponsors, but he also wanted to open it up for everyone. And that's not something that you want to have to deal with. That's a big can of worms. That's a rabbit hole that once you start going down it, you open up all these other questions and all these other avenues. So it makes sense to me that they refused that to him. Now, the next one that he talked about that was a major issue for him was when he wanted to walk Chael Sonnen to the ring at the UFC fight in Chicago.
This was the night before
which was a
Royal
good
Rumble.
idea. Right, which was a good idea, a great idea, as a matter of fact. And then, not less than 2 weeks later, or 2 months later maybe, I can't remember which one, Triple H is walking down to the ring with Floyd Mayweather. Now, this is a scenario where clearly what happened was, that's a good idea, let me take that and keep it for myself.
Yes, which he did make mention of multiple times.
I think that's completely obvious.
He made mention of that multiple times. He said the Shield was his idea. Now, granted, this is a world where multiple people come up with the same kind of idea at the same time. That's why you get movies like Armageddon and that other asteroid movie that came out at the same time.
Deep Impact.
Yes, that's why you get Twister and F5 Storm or whatever. You get all that type of bullshit out there. But he says that. He went up to somebody and they were like, hey, we want to put you with Daniel Bryan and The Big Show. And he said, why don't you give me 2 up-and-comers? That way they can learn from me. That way they can do all this. And they were like, well, who do you, or give me 3 newcomers. Give me some guys that can actually, prevent me from losing to The Rock at the Royal Rumble. And they were like, well, who do you want? And he said, give me Seth Rollins, Ambrose, and Cassius Ohno. And for those that don't know, that's Chris Hero, who's no longer with the WWE, not in developmental or anywhere else. He's actually back out to being an indie star. And obviously they were like, well, that's a good idea. But we want Roman Reigns in there. And he's like, well, fine. You want your guy that we can teach and make great. Go ahead. Yeah, we'll go with that. And then before you know it, like they completely take it away from him. He's supposed to just lose to The Rock and be done with that. And then all of a sudden it's hey, it's Survivor Series, we're going to go ahead and have these 3 guys come out and actually stop John Cena from winning his match or whatever. Well, who is it? It's Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose, and Roman Reigns. And suddenly the Shield is born. So I don't know if that's really the case. I mean, if he's sitting in on production meetings and he gives out the idea, I think that at that point, it's his own fault. He doesn't own creative license to that stuff. That's owned by them. That's their intellectual properties. So they're allowed to do it now.
Sure, yeah.
Now, granted, when they say it's their idea, and look at how genius we are for starting the Shield. Well, yeah, then there's something that you get a little bit bitter about. But who hasn't felt like, hey, I came up with this idea? Hell, I could tell everybody.
Well, I mean, that's.
I could tell everybody the story about how I actually wrote a comic book story of the very first time that Bruce Wayne met Clark Kent, and I actually sent it to DC Comics, and guess what? Couple years later, a guy by the name of Jeff Loeb actually wrote the exact same story that I had written, and it's like, what the fuck, you know? But at this point, it absolutely happened. Okay. But you know what? Okay. That guy's the vice president of Marvel Television and movie studios at this point, and I'm sitting.
And they never called you to give you a job.
And they never called me. Maybe they just didn't like the words I used in it. I don't know. But anyways, I digress there. Let's get back to the topics. Let's get back to wrestling. And what I can tell you is that you know, with that stuff, if you're going to sit in on those production meetings and you have a good idea, someone's going to take it. You know, it's going to happen because you're not the writer. You're not that guy. So if they want to all of a sudden say, hey, we're going to have him beat up we're going to have these 3 guys beat up Ryback this month. Guess what? If it was your idea, great. You're not going to get credit for it. It's the WWE's idea at that point. Just get over it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you know, it's one of but it's one of their problems. You know, it's one of their historical issues and part of their insecurity. You know, meaning, you know, Stephanie, Triple H, and Vince, is that if it's not their idea, they don't like it. So they take it and they make it their idea. So then they have something to say they created. Which is what they've done with tons of things. Tons and tons of different things they've taken and molded and made their own so that they could say they created it.
No, I absolutely agree. But at the same time, you work for the company, you're an independent contractor with them, the ideas that you give them are theirs. It's just the way it is.
Sure, you know, definitely. And you know, Punk's line from that was, I see now that it's easier to ask forgiveness than to ask permission, so next time I won't ask. You know.
Yeah, I did like the fact that he said next time I won't ask. Like in other words, at some point he thinks he might talk to these guys again. Now, granted, I'm not saying that's the case, folks. In fact, the way he makes it sound, I will never, ever, ever work for them again. But then, you know, we're gonna, you know, turn this into the Vince McMahon interview as well. And you know, Vince has said multiple times, I won't do business with that guy again. I won't do business with this person again. And all I can say is, before we even get into the Vince McMahon side of stuff, is that the way that his eyes rolled when he said Hulk Hogan, oh God, Hulk Hogan, you're looking at him and you're like, yeah, because Hulk Hogan's a businessman. So when Hulk Hogan comes in there and he brings his Harvey Schiller lawyer with him to sit there and knock everything out, it's like holy shit, you know, we're not just dealing with 2 guys doing a handshake deal here. We're going ahead and we're basically putting 75 pages on paper. So Ward, what else do you want to say about the CM Punk interview? Because we've almost gone an hour just on him.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's so much that I don't even know whether we've really done it complete justice. I mean, you know, I've listened to the entire thing 2 times through now, and there's just a lot there. There's a lot of information there. There's a lot of stuff.
And he's doing another one this week.
Right, which is very, you know, exciting. They're doing like a question and answer session this week on the Colt Cabana podcast with them. So that'll be fascinating yet again, I'm sure. And maybe we get some things clarified. Maybe we get some things expounded upon. Maybe we get some more new information. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if Phil Brooks doesn't pop up on a podcast of his own. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we don't start to hear more from him. But, you know, I guess to close it out, the only other thing I want to talk about is just how much I respect him and admire him for the way he handled his business. He knew that he needed to kind of go black, you know, in terms of communications for a while after he left. And it was clear that he wanted to get to a place where he could figure out mentally what his next step should be and get his ducks in a row legally and handle his situation so that if he wanted to say something, he absolutely could. And I really admire the way he handled the podcast with Colt Cabana, as I've already said. I really admire the stance he's taken on a lot of different things. And more than anything, I admire his consistent, solid performance throughout basically his entire run. I'll always remember that match with Daniel Bryan that we got to see at that pay-per-view at Over the Limit 2012, and I'll always remember how people never gave that match credit for being as great as it was. It's truly one of the greatest matches I've seen in a long time. If you go back and watch it now, it's 23 minutes or so of basically almost a flawless match. And that's among many other matches. Obviously, he gave John Cena his best matches. He gave Ryback his best matches, which he had a lot to say about Ryback. That's a whole nother discussion. He hated giving Ryback his best matches, but he did.
Actually, let me say something real quick about that I really wanted to touch upon, and I'm pretty adamant about this one. Is that he flat out says in his interview, if you don't think that I'm the WrestleMania main event, but you think I'm good enough to wrestle the guys in the main event, you need to put me with those guys so that I can learn how to be the WrestleMania main event. Right? He did say that.
Something to that effect, yeah.
But then he also said, okay, let's use a hockey analogy. For the AHL guys to finally learn how to be NHL guys, they've got to play against NHL guys, right? So my problem with this statement is he contradicts himself here because he says Ryback had no reason to be in the ring with me. Well, how do you get a green guy who's really over to be able to wrestle solid matches without putting him against guys that can wrestle solid matches?
Well, he resented it and he hated it because he felt like he was already injured enough and they were putting him with somebody who was unsafe.
Well,
he didn't feel like he was a safe worker.
Well, how do you become safer, though?
If what he says is true.
How do you become safer, though? You wrestle guys who are safe.
Well, you don't get to the main roster until you're safe.
Well,
you don't get to handle my prime grade A talent until you're a safe worker with a proven track record.
Well, nowadays that doesn't happen. You've got a lot of guys.
Well, it should. That's a problem.
Well, but they're but hey,
whether it happens or not,
but they're working on that. Is what I'm saying. They've got their farm system now that actually does show proven commodities. Well,
yeah. I mean, they're trying to, but CM Punk should have. He's a top guy. He quote unquote main evented WrestleMania, as Vince McMahon told him. He wrestled the Undertaker. That's the main event. Then he should be able to have some leeway as far as who he wants to wrestle. And if he feels somebody's unsafe and he's already beat up, give the guy some leniency.
I just think if you're gonna, I just think flat out, if you're gonna sit there and say the only way to get better is to wrestle the best, well then shut your fucking mouth because you're pissed off that you're the best. And yet you don't want to be the guy that's sitting there helping these guys get better.
Well, nobody wants to be the guy who gets injured, Rob. I mean, no professional wrestler wants to be the guy who works with the unsafe worker.
I agree with that. And
nobody wants to.
And for the record, Bret Hart said in the ring, I never hurt anybody, and yet I was wrestling a green guy in Bill Goldberg, and Bill Goldberg, by the time he wrestled Bret Hart, had been in the wrestling industry for 4 years. So the fact that he still called him a green guy was because, well, he never wrestled a match more than like 15 minutes at that point. Well, what happens? He kicks Bret Hart in the head. Bret Hart goes home with a concussion. I think that Ryback's attitude in it is what really pissed CM Punk off. He sat there and he flat out said, I went up to him afterwards and I said, were you trying to kill me or are you just stupid? And of course, Ryback looked at him and said, I'm just stupid. And I doubt that's what the big guy actually said, but I could picture it being something close to that. So I'm just saying that you can't have it both ways. If you want younger workers to get better by working with better guys, then guess what? At some point, you're going to be that better guy that has to work with the younger workers. It's that simple.
I can agree with that.
So all right, let's go ahead and collect our thoughts real quick, and then we're going to jump into the Vince McMahon interview. So Ward, I missed the first 2 minutes of it, and you said that the first thing Stone Cold came right out of the gate with was the WWE Network. So why don't you talk about that?
Oh, sure. I mean, I was very curious as far as how this interview was going to go, and I was very curious to see how the first few seconds would go, or the first minute, because that was going to determine how this interview was going to be conducted and, whether it was going to be a quote-unquote, like, official WWE interview or whether it was going to be an episode of the Steve Austin Show was really the question I had. And it turned into very quickly being an episode of the Steve Austin Show, which is, of course, better than a WWE-produced interview of some sort.
So did you find it interesting that they called it the Stone Cold Podcast instead of the Steve Austin Show?
I didn't notice, but that is an interesting point, I guess. Maybe they'll start to do some sort of sponsorships or something there, or start giving some sort of kickback on it.
Well, I also
or if we see episodes of Steve Austin live, which could very well be the case.
And I also noticed that Vince McMahon did mention that they built the set for him. So So the Stone Cold podcast last night was a set built by Vince McMahon. Obviously, if you go back and watch the video on WWE Network, and I'll let Ward get right back into the beginning of it, but if you go back and actually watch this video, you can tell that they pretty much built a soundproof room to have this conversation with, so that they could keep everything quiet around them, and I was really impressed by that. So Ward, so the first couple minutes, you basically thought this is gonna show us what this really is. Is Steve Austin gonna have a leash on, or is he able to go out and ask what he wants? And so the first thing that he asked about was WWE Network, and that turned your mind to it was an episode of his show, not Vince McMahon's, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, basically, it seemed like he was right out of the gate. How is the network doing? Vince basically responded with typical corporate response of, it's doing well. We think the content is doing well. We have a high satisfaction rating, blah, blah, blah. And that was, what I expected to hear, I guess.
But then he asked about Britain.
Yeah. Then he asked about the UK, which Vince said hopefully by the first of the year would be in place. But obviously he didn't want to commit to anything because he was, trepidatious because of their whole fiasco when they told him it was ready to go, and then it turned out it wasn't.
You think they're going to give the UK not 6 free months when they finally do come out?
I seriously doubt it, but a free month wouldn't be a bad idea, I don't think. But otherwise, that was the start of it. So he came right out of the gate hitting pretty heavy and hard. Couldn't tell by McMahon's reaction whether he was taken off guard exactly. I feel like he kind of was the vibes I picked up from it. I felt like he was a little bit surprised that he went right for the jugular there.
Yeah, I think when you get Stone Cold Steve Austin into anything and his fans want him to be as real as possible, it's going to be one of those things where he probably gave Vince a bunch of things that he was going to talk about, and then said, so which ones of these can't I talk about? And Vince probably looked at him because it's Steve Austin and said, you can ask me anything, pal. And thinking that Steve would...
I don't know about any of that stuff, but either way, there didn't seem to be very much at all that was off limits.
Well, there you go. So of course, he asked... Austin asked him how in tune with the fans Vince McMahon is, and Vince said that he I think let me see. He said they're not into every match. They're not all going to be hits. But we've got to do what we can to get the people over. So from there, one of the things that he touched upon was Cesaro. And were you as shocked as I was by Vince McMahon basically saying Cesaro, while he's got it in the ring, he doesn't have it everywhere?
Not really. I mean, the fact that they haven't taken advantage of him or pushed him as a top star yet shows that he's not confident that he has what he's looking for. And to be honest with you, I don't think he has the full package yet. He is fantastic in the ring. He's amazing in the ring. We haven't seen him cut real promos. We haven't seen him really develop a persona for himself that's really something special. So he's missing a little bit. I would put him, a step higher than Roman Reigns at this point because his in-ring work is so good. Maybe 2 steps higher than Roman Reigns because of that. But, otherwise, I don't see him as at this point having the full package that he needs to have before Vince is comfortable pushing him to the top.
Well, and even Austin actually started saying, the one thing that he was missing was the mic skills. They put him with Heyman, and then, 3 weeks later, they take Heyman away from him. And you kind of saw that. That
yet again is just lack of long-term planning. They don't have a plan in place for these guys for what they're going to do.
Well, I think they actually, if you go back and look at the dirt sheets, they pretty much said that the reason why he was taken away from Heyman is because they wanted to take Heyman away from Cesaro and just make him Brock's guy right now. And you're right, it was because they weren't thinking long-term. They were thinking, hey, Heyman's the best talker on our shows. We got to keep him on here. We got to keep him going. And then they realized he should be almost as special an attraction as Brock Lesnar. So he should show up a couple weeks before Brock does and say, don't poke the bear, because when the bear comes in, it's going to be bad. I don't know. It's just, I thought it was interesting because all Austin talks about on his podcast is how good Cesaro is. And yet here he was basically saying, something's not clicking with him. What is it? And Vince basically started talking about, the last guy to grab that brass ring. The last guy to grab that brass ring was John Cena. And then he said, I think we got a bunch of guys that want to, like Ambrose and Rollins and Roman Reigns. But, leaves out guys that actually did try to grab that brass ring, got hurt, unfortunately, in the process, like Daniel Bryan or Dolph Ziggler. Those guys actually...
Or CM Punk.
Well, that was what he said right before CM Punk, right? So that was one of those things where, like, I think that's what made Austin go, you want to talk about CM Punk? Yes.
Well, yeah. But that, one of those guys who reached for the brass ring. Punk held the title longer than anybody in the last 15 years. He reached pretty hard.
Yeah. So he did, and since you already mentioned it, let's go right into it. What was the first thing that Vince McMahon did when they started talking about CM Punk?
He apologized, which is amazing to see. But it shows that he's learned that he's a corporation now.
I think Vince McMahon had no idea, because he hadn't talked to Punk at that point. It was the person in talent relations, Triple H, the person, the lawyer, but none of those situations, and even Punk didn't say that it was Vince that he was talking to. Now, if you have listened to the Ariel Helwani interview with CM Punk the day before Royal Rumble, the day before, or 2 days before he ended up walking out of the company, he said, I can call Vince right now, I can text him at 4 in the morning, and we're both night owls, he'll pick up the phone, he'll call me, and we'll talk. And obviously there was a miscommunication there.
There's really a lot of hatred or a lot of disdain, a lot of heat between Punk and Triple H. And it's very possible that Vince McMahon did not know about, what he was apologizing for was the fact that Punk received his termination papers on his wedding day.
Yes.
Which was a huge problem for Punk, which was really kind of sort of the breaking point where he said, all right, let me go get a lawyer, because I'm sick of dealing with these petty wannabe business people that are really just bullies, and that's what they are. They're bullies, all of them. The three of them specifically. And he talked about how he got a message from Triple H, right before he was about to get married and go on his honeymoon. So Triple H obviously knew that he was about to get married, But it's possible that Vince McMahon did not know and was not in the loop on him being sent his termination papers at that time. But a coincidence, I don't think it was. That's a joke.
Well, no. I think that he didn't say it was an express letter or anything like that came next day or anything. But it's highly possible that Triple H knew that he was going on his honeymoon, and of course Punk even says during the interview twice to two different people, I'll call you as soon as I'm back from my honeymoon. And there you go. It's one of those things. The termination paperwork or whatever. I think I don't know. It's funny to me because obviously when Vince McMahon said, "Well, you're suspended," well, okay, I'm going to sit at home and do whatever the hell I want, and then what happens in the regular world, not this corporation of wrestlers or anything. In the regular world, if you get suspended for something, chances are if you haven't come back to work in 4 months, you're going to be fired. It's just the way it is. If you've lasted that long under suspension, it's probably because they lost your file like Milton from Office Space. It's
sure, exactly.
Yeah.
He interpreted the fact that he received those papers on that day as a direct slap in the face.
Absolutely, and
I think he had a right to. Whether it was intended as such or whether it ended up being taken as such, I can understand both perspectives.
Absolutely.
But I also cannot think that it's possible that it was a coincidence. I think it was purposefully and maliciously done. But that's just me. And, who knows for sure, maybe it is a case of the big corporations, different departments not knowing what the other's doing or, not being able to know what the other hand was doing or whatever, because they have their hands on so many pots and so many different departments of this big, massive empire that he always talks about he's built. I don't know. But either way, he did come out of the gate apologizing to CM Punk and basically stating that he wouldn't be surprised to see them working together again. And who knows? Who knows on that? At this point, I'd say, who knows, 20 years down the road, Punk is still relatively young, or 15 years down the road. What happens?
Well,
maybe he'll get the itch one day, but I would not be surprised at all if he never did.
Well, okay, so Austin actually says when he left the company, because he's the only other one that kind of did something like this that in recent memory that I can remember, and he basically said if he didn't have Jim Ross, that he didn't think that he would have ever talked to Vince McMahon again. And Jim Ross played the mediator and was able to sit there and actually talk to him and got the two people at the table. And Austin even said, when he showed up at the hotel room that they were going to be talking at, that he was like, is this a mob hit? Because he showed up, he's the only one there, and he's just waiting for the assassin to walk in the door. But Vince is one of those guys that if he knows it's best for business, and this is something that obviously I think the younger generation of McMahon and Levesque are going to have to figure out, is that sometimes you got to make peace with those that you don't like, specifically to make the fans happy. Now, granted, does this mean we'll ever see CM Punk wrestle again? Maybe not. But does it mean that Vince McMahon himself will actually barter something to get him in the Hall of Fame? Maybe. Because after a couple years of letting that bitterness settle, and even Punk during his interview said that it was, it's okay to be bitter, but sometimes you have to work through it, and you have to enjoy life, and that's what he said he started to do. I think that a kid that grew up loving wrestling is going to want to finish in wrestling. I mean, there was a story a long time ago about how The Rock's contract, that he had, that long contract that he had that was all the way up through 2004 when he left the company, that contract apparently ran out without them renegotiating a new deal for him, and he apparently was bitter about it. Didn't want to work with him for a couple years. And finally, sat down with Vince McMahon. And I think what really happened is when he set up and did that deal for the host of WrestleMania that one year, that when he went out there in front of the crowd, he was like, I miss this too much. And I don't know, I could be 100% wrong with that, but I just think that based on how much he always said that he loved the fans and everything, that when he finally got in front of them again, he needed it. And I kind of think that we might see CM Punk down the road. Now, granted, I'm not saying next year. I'm not saying a couple years. I think that as if someone is there that he's able to talk to in a position of some kind of power, that he'd be able to get the creative stroke that he needs to not have to worry about Triple H being in charge. I think that plus a couple of years to let the hearts mend a little bit might actually be enough to get him back in front of a crowd, so that people sit there and actually get to say goodbye to him. I don't know.
Sure. And I mean, that's a big part of, what he talked about, is the fact that he feels this weird pressure to talk about this, this whole situation, and to expose the things that he felt like were wrong or were corruptions within the organization. And that's interesting to me, because it tells me that his talking about all this stuff publicly, CM Punk's talking about all this stuff, is a therapeutic thing for him that he needs to do in order to move on with his life and to fully get over it. And I think that's important. And, that's the reason why we have all these answers, is not because he felt like we needed to know. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, absolutely. I think getting back to the Vince side of things, he pretty much did say when lawyers get involved, it's like hell in a handbasket. And that was a direct quote from him. And he's right. As soon as lawyers are involved, and this is why Hogan, took so long to get the deals in place and to come back and do everything the way that he did, because as soon as the lawyers are involved, it's not a family business anymore. Austin talked about how Vince tried to fine him $650,000 for coming back. What did you think of that story?
I think there's something to be had on both sides of Steve Austin's story, that he's told 1.5 million times about the time that he walked out when they asked him to job to Brock Lesnar with no build-up or no notice. And frankly, I don't think that Steve Austin has much to be ashamed for that whole scenario. I think he was right to walk out. we could talk about that and debate that back and forth for a million years, but ultimately they settled on $250K, and Steve Austin paid him apparently, or Vince McMahon took it out of his pay or whatever in order to fine him $250,000 for not showing up, which Vince McMahon I think felt like he needed to do for the locker room to show people that there is going to be some sort of retribution when you don't show up to a date you're advertised for.
The way they made it sound, though, is that they made it sound like, and in fact, Austin said, I never told anybody else that story. It kind of makes you think, wow, like, did Austin, when he came back, was everything just, everything's forgiven or whatever? Or did he actually go backstage and say, no, they fined me? Because he didn't really make it sound like they said that. He made it sound like they pretty much said, all right, all's forgiven now, go ahead and go back to work, and we never told this story before. And I'm not saying he's a liar or anything. I bet he did get fined $250,000, considering Batista got fined $250,000 for blading in a pay-per-view match at one point. So it's and he basically said, well, that was the moment when he realized that it's time for him to leave too. So Vince called Punk a loner. Said that he had bad communication skills, said a lot of different things about him, and then...
Which is true.
And then basically said, and a lot could be said the same about me. And Punk, like I said, going back to the Ariel Helwani interview, 2 days before he walked out, basically said that him and Vince were very similar. They got along great. Hell, Vince McMahon came out of retirement from the ring to sit there and actually, take kendo stick shots from CM Punk. So, like obviously there was mutual respect between the two of them. But I was shocked to see that Vince McMahon didn't quite go head on with the CM Punk thing. I did like seeing the apology for the walking papers on his wedding day. I thought that was really classy of Vince McMahon to sit there and apologize.
He definitely took the high road, which I wasn't expecting.
I don't even think it was the high road. I think he realized that his company made a mistake there, and it was worth stating. So he personally apologized for it because people. Well,
he realizes that it's in the best interest of his company for him to apologize for it, because if it's true or if it's not, his story makes them look really petty and really immature and really bad.
Sure. You already said it, Ward, that Austin didn't really pull punches. So, of course, he asked about The Undertaker at WrestleMania. And we can debate back and forth. He actually said that no one wants to get... And to use The Undertaker's full name was such a sign of how real this interview was to me. Because obviously, him saying The Undertaker, everyone knows that his name's Mark Calloway. If you're a behind the scenes wrestling fan like you and I are, but for people that have only ever seen The Undertaker wrestle at WrestleMania or on SmackDown or on Raw, they've only ever seen The Undertaker. So for him to say that no man ever wanted to give as much back to the business as Mark Calloway, I was shocked to see him use the real name there, especially since, obviously he took this time in this interview as a moment of kayfabe, but at the same time, it just, to me, I was kind of blown away by that. Am I wrong for thinking that?
Not really. I mean, it just goes to show sort of the walls and the barriers that were broken down with this interview for kind of the first time. Vince McMahon, coming out at the very beginning of the interview talking about the difference between sports entertainment and pro wrestling, referencing that several times. Actually, at the first part of the interview, Steve Austin says, in the business of pro wrestling, and Vince McMahon stops him and he says, "That's what my dad did," with some sort of like strange, almost disdain in his voice, even though he worships his father, which becomes apparent, throughout the entire interview, that he's very much, a young kid, standing sort of in perpetual admiration of his father. But, at the same time, I don't think that Austin really intended to lead him into that direction until Vince started opening up in that way about CM Punk. And then afterwards, Vince pretty much figured that everything was open at that point and started to kind of go on that track.
Were you a little bit surprised at how far he pulled the curtain back
Yeah, definitely. Because we don't see him talking about the whole creative process and actually providing any sort of justification for his decisions ever. That's not something he feels like his audience is entitled to. But I was happy to see it, and I hope that we see more of it. Actually, I would love to see some sort of recurring basis where things like this happen with Vince, because frankly, we can sit back and dissect the TV booking all day long, but if we don't know, the whole ins and outs of what's going on behind closed doors at the business, we're not really working under the same constraints that they are, obviously. Which I think it's nice to hear insights occasionally of what those constraints are and what types of things they're having to deal with, and the reason why things turned out to be this end of this scenario is because for these 15 reasons that nobody ever talked about or knew about.
Sure. So they talked about the Undertaker streak, and at one point Vince did kind of make it sound like it was the Undertaker's idea to drop the streak to Brock Lesnar, and Austin flat out asked him. He said, "Now you're telling me that was the Undertaker's decision?" He said, "No, it was my decision." So that was the first. Now granted, Vince McMahon has said that he's a sports entertainment runner for a while, but how often has he ever said flat out in front of a group of people, and we're talking probably millions of people listening on the WWE Network? I would almost be surprised to hear that they didn't jump up.
Well, millions of people don't have the WWE Network, but yeah.
Well, what I'm saying is I wouldn't be surprised to hear that their network subscriptions went up just because of that podcast. But and if it did, I could almost picture them doing an after Raw Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast every week. Which would not surprise me in the slightest. I haven't watched Raw this week, but I wouldn't be surprised, and I would be surprised if Stone Cold Steve Austin didn't make an appearance in the ring to sit there and talk about it before it actually happened, because that would have been the proper promotion for it. But regardless of that, the hearing him basically say, "I made the call," because you keep hearing that Vince isn't fully in charge anymore. The Kurt Angle job, that he's looking for. Vince McMahon apparently said Triple H is in charge of that now. Talk to him. This is one of those things where it's like ultimately he's still in charge of the business, and there you actually saw it. So I was kind of amazed to hear him say, "I made the call. I said."
Well, he's certainly still in charge of the top 5 finishes of WrestleMania.
Sure.
If not all the minutia of the day-to-day whatever.
He did also go on record as to say that you can't always just have one main event at WrestleMania, like Austin versus The Rock, and that you have to have multiple main events, and I thought that was a direct jab at what CM Punk had said in his interview, without necessarily trying to be a specific jab at that. I think it allows him to sit there and say that he has multiple main event spots for people for WrestleMania. If you're on the biggest show, you're in one of the biggest spots, and you should just be happy about it. They talked about the Monday Night War. They talked about Sting. They talked about a lot of stuff there. He pretty much went on record as saying that people like Brock Lesnar and Sting don't need to be seen every week, because if they are, they kind of lose their luster. He went on to mention Jake the Snake Roberts specifically, saying the first time you see him come out there with the big python, you're like, holy crap, this is amazing. But then after that, he just becomes one of the regular guys if you see him every week. What does that mean for the people that are out there every week, Ward?
Well, it means that it's like watching a season of NFL playoffs that never ends, where the same 2 teams are against each other every week. That's the analogy that Wade Keller uses all the time, that I really like.
So it's the WWE Tag Team Division.
Basically, yeah. I mean, it's just WWE. It's their same stale roster with their same stale guys. And the reason why they pop big buy rates for WrestleMania is because they bring in guys that are fresh and not stale.
I agree with that. Absolutely. I think that's a lot harsher of a statement than it actually sounds like, but it's true. It's
and that's something that CM Punk didn't understand. He actually said in his interview that WrestleMania draws because it's WrestleMania. And that's somewhat true, but the reason why WrestleMania still draws is because it has a legacy of main event special attraction talent.
Yeah, if Mania if Mania was just full of the same guys as the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, I'd be a little bit bored and say, I'm not watching Mania this year.
You'd have a problem.
One thing we didn't talk about at all was how CM Punk actually said to Triple H, "You need to wrestle me. I don't need to wrestle you." What was your take on that? I know we're going back into the CM Punk statements, but that was one that I forgot about, and now I'm remembering it.
I mean, there's so many different ways you can interpret that, but I think it has to do with the fact that the privilege was assumed to be CM Punk's, that he would wrestle Triple H's, or that he would wrestle Triple H, instead of the privilege being Triple H's to wrestle CM Punk. I think that's the problem, is that he's being told, oh, you have this great opportunity to wrestle the amazing, awesome Triple H, instead of Triple H coming to him and saying, hey, I'd really like to work with you for WrestleMania. Would you have a match with me? I'd like to make it up the fact that I beat you 3 years ago when you should have won, which is another thing that Punk said he never forgave him for.
Multiple times.
Never forgot about.
Yeah.
Which is true, and which is exactly a perfect instance of Triple H's own insecurity and lack of confidence in his position as a member of the business side of the business instead of a member of the performing side of the business. Which, ironically enough, do you recall, Rob, in the Vince McMahon interview, what Vince McMahon was told by his father when he told him he wanted to be a performer in the business?
He said you can either be a businessman or you can be a performer. And he doesn't want him to be a performer, he wants him to be a businessman.
Because businessmen make more money and you can't be both.
Tell that to Hulk Hogan.
Which is fantastic. No. Tell that to Triple H.
Well, Triple H wrestles 3 matches a year now. I wouldn't call him a performer anymore. He's a special attraction.
But the fact of the matter is that people don't like him because his hand is in both sides of the pot.
Yeah,
You don't think he has influence over his WrestleMania pay?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well,
I'm sure he has more than a guy like CM Punk has.
He's the head of talent relations. He's the guy that ends up cutting the check if you're going to be arguing about it. So
he's the CFO. What does CFO stand for?
Chief Financial Officer. He's the COO, by the way. He's the Chief Operating Officer, not the CEO.
Never mind. He's the COO. That point is invalid. Let's continue.
All right. So they basically after all that stuff. One thing I did want to bring up before I just talk about how Austin started stroking McMahon's ego, probably because he made him feel so bad for asking the tough questions. He asked him point blank, "Is Macho Man Randy Savage going to be in the Hall of Fame?" And what was his answer, Ward? I loved it.
He said yes. He said that's coming at some point. Who knows when?
Well,
maybe not this year, but I guess next year.
He said maybe not. Maybe. Well, he wants it to be a surprise when they finally announce it, obviously. But is it going to be the first one that gets in after he's done? Like,
I don't know. My answer to that is probably he's going to be the first one in there after Lanny Poffo is probably done. Because Lanny Poffo's been really the one holding up this whole process this whole time.
That's true. But they've got the DVD coming out, which means Lanny Poffo did the interviews. So chances are it's part of the agreement. It's part of the deal. Hey, we'll go ahead and give the Poffo family this much money to not have the father in there, Angelo. So who knows?
And Lanny Poffo.
Yeah, because the genius absolutely needs to be in the WWE Hall of Fame. Like Drew Carey
According to him, that was what Randy said before he died, was that the whole family needed to go in. And that's what's been holding up this whole process.
Well, if you're going to do that, then Gorgeous George, Miss Elizabeth, and Scary Sherry all need to be in there. So,
yeah.
As part of the Poffo family. At least Miss Elizabeth, she actually was part of the family for a while. So then after that, I really felt like Austin just started stroking McMahon's ego. Basically saying, hey, I was white hot because you were white hot. Everything was working out like that. But we hit the meat and potatoes of the Vince McMahon interview. You and I both got a nice little pop out of us when we heard Vince McMahon say, "It's my show. I run the network. I can go ahead and go 15 more minutes." And
Well, it was really funny. That was one of my favorite parts of the whole interview is when Austin says, "I'm getting the 1 minute signal. We have 1 minute. We got to wrap this up." And then he says, "Well, we'll continue off air on the network, but I want to keep going and have you answer this question for my podcast." That's when Vince McMahon said, since I run the network, we can keep going another 15 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and give these people the authorization, which basically means they hit pause on the next program that's about to start. Heck of an authorization. But, when a guy runs his own network, he can be interviewed for as long as he damn well pleases. And he certainly doesn't want to have any other outlet have some sort of exclusive with him because his network couldn't stay on air long enough to get the scoop.
Yeah, and it so with all that, is this episode going to be on the Steve Austin show, or is this just a one-time deal where Steve Austin did what he does?
No, it's a co-op thing. So they aired live on the network, but it will be Steve Austin's episode this week, from what I understand, or maybe next week or something. But it will be an actual episode of the Steve Austin show.
So all right, a couple people have actually come out and actually given praise for the episodes, both of them. Chris Jericho actually, was one of the people that CM Punk actually said some disheartening things about, and Chris Jericho actually came out and said that he never, after CM Punk left, never asked CM Punk to be on his show, because he didn't want to be that kind of guy, and has only sent him a couple text messages about music that they both liked or whatever. So do you think Jericho may have asked him? Do you think that the people that were actually trying to get interviews with him while he was quote-unquote suspended were actually still talking to CM Punk for Chris Jericho, which might have caused the confusion there? Or do you just think that CM Punk's got his timing a little bit wrong, and because of that he's a little more bitter than he should be about Chris Jericho just checking on his friend?
Well, I mean, I don't think it was all about Chris Jericho. I think it was all about all sorts of different people that he felt like he mistrusted because of the fact that they wanted to get a scoop.
He specifically said and Chris Jericho.
That was an example he gave of someone that he didn't want to have contact with because he felt like there would be ulterior motives.
Sure.
And this is a scenario where he has to get his legal stuff straight before he can speak out on anything related to that. So, if I were him in this scenario, I do the same thing he does. I go dark to everyone except for my A grade friends, for those very top close people that I know are on my side no matter what. And that exterior ring of friendships, of acquaintances, of guys that but that you don't necessarily trust, you keep them far away.
So you do it for
until you're ready to talk. Well, you would be up there in my top list, I guess.
I'd be number one.
We're already kind of on that list for each other, I guess. Yeah. Maybe, somewhere in there. But, otherwise,
I mean, I've got a podcast,
I have a wife and a mother as well.
So.
Well, I have a wife and a mother that I like to talk to sometimes. But, otherwise, I think it's just one of those scenarios where I don't think Chris Jericho ever called him up and said, "Hey, do you want to be on my podcast and talk about this stuff?" But I think that it's one of those scenarios where he figured it was in his best interest to keep things as close to his chest as he could, and he didn't want to take the risk of talking to somebody who would maybe try to butter him up and get him on their show. And Jericho, I think he thought of as one of those people.
Well, Jericho's probably one of the most popular of those people. Jim Ross has said that he'd love to work a pay-per-view commentary team with CM Punk. And now I wonder if part of the agreement with CM Punk is that he's not allowed to work with other companies as a commentator or anything else. But I'm sure we'll actually find more about that out in the coming time. So
I don't know. He said he got everything he wanted and more from his settlement. So who knows?
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, Ward, I've pretty much talked about as much as I think I can. We've almost gone as long as the CM Punk interview at this point. So obviously, if anyone's got any comments or anything, you can put them up on our Facebook page. But Ward, do you have anything else you want to throw in here at the end?
I just wanted to talk about real quick. Probably my favorite moment for the whole interview was when Vince McMahon recounted the famous stories of shoving all the famous people in his swimming pool.
Well, before you say that,
I got a real kick out of.
But before you say that, I do want to go ahead and say that the entire time he was telling that story, you were sitting there going, "He's a bully. He's a bully."
Well, dude, I mean, it was just hilarious to me that he thinks it is one of the funniest things in the world to push unsuspecting professional people into swimming pools at business meetings. It just gave him so much delight and so much joy, but he doesn't understand. He's like this little kid in a grown-up man genius body. He just doesn't understand that people don't appreciate that's being a bully. It's picking on people. But otherwise, I thought it was really funny. It was a glimpse into the inside of what McMahon is like in his day-to-day life, and I like that. But otherwise, I'm good to wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you go ahead and take us out of this?
Sure thing. Follow me on Twitter at Charles the Turd. Follow Rob on Twitter at Podchak. Hit us up on Facebook at facebook.com/POTSY and the Turd. And subscribe on iTunes for free. Rob, I am tapped out. It is time for the music.
That's right. I win.
You win what?
You tapped out. I win.
Okay.
Music!
Yeah, music.